At some point today, you are going to write something down. Maybe a text message, a note, a to-do list, a reminder in your phone, a half-formed idea you do not want to lose. And you probably will not think twice about it. But for most of human history, that was impossible. If a person forgot something, it was gone. If a witness died, the memory died with them. If a promise was made, it lived only in the minds of the people who heard it. Then, around 5,000 years ago, humans discovered something strange. You could take a thought out of your head and put it somewhere else. On clay, on bone, on papyrus, on paper, on a screen. And once that happened, human memory was no longer trapped inside the human body. But here's the weird part. The first things humans wrote down were probably not love poems, not myths, not philosophy, not the secrets of the universe. They were receipts. Early cuneiform developed in Mesopotamia, with some of the earliest tablets dating to around 3200 BC. Scholars have long connected its origins to accounting systems for goods like grain and livestock. Imagine an ancient city in southern Mesopotamia. There are no banks, no spreadsheets, no contracts saved in Google Drive. But there is barley, there are sheep, there is beer, there are workers who need rations, there are temples collecting goods, there are officials distributing them. And suddenly, memory is not enough. A village can run on memory. A family can run on memory. A small tribe can remember who owes what to whom. But a city cannot. Once people start storing grain, paying workers, collecting taxes, and moving goods through temples and palaces, spoken words become fragile. Someone says, I gave you 30 jars. Someone else says, no, you gave me 20. A worker says, I was promised beer. An official says, I already paid you. And in that moment, civilization runs into a problem. Human memory is too small for the world humans are building. So we made a new kind of memory, a memory outside the body. One of the earliest surviving examples of writing is in the British Museum, and it's a clay tablet from southern Iraq, made from 3100 to 3000 BC, recording beer given to workers as daily rations. It's almost funny. Before humans wrote down wisdom, they wrote down beer. But it also makes perfect sense. Writing was not born because humans became poetic. Writing was born because humans became complicated. The first marks were not trying to be beautiful. They were trying to be trusted. For the first time, a society could say, this happened, this was counted, this was promised, this is owed. And once you can write down what is owed, you can build a city. There is even an ancient name that sometimes gets mentioned here. Kushim. Kushim may be one of the earliest recorded personal names in history, although scholars debate whether the word refers to a person, an office, or an institution. Either way, the context is not heroic. It is administrative. Human history in writing begins less like an epic poem and more like an invoice, and that tells us something important. Writing began as a tool for control. Control over grain, over labor, over promises, control over memory. But then something escaped, because once humans realized a symbol could preserve a number, they realized it could preserve anything. A law, a prayer, a story, a warning, a recipe, a map, a dream, a life. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, cuneiform was being used not only for economic records, but also for religious, political, literary, and scholarly documents. That is when writing changed from a record-keeping tool into something much stranger. It became a way for the dead to speak. Think about that. Every person before writing had a voice that disappeared into thin air. Maybe their children remembered it. Maybe their students repeated it. Maybe a song carried it for a few generations. But eventually, the sound vanished. Writing changed the expiration date of a thought. A farmer could mark a debt. A king could declare a law. A priestess could write a hymn. A philosopher could record a question. A scientist could sketch an idea that was not yet ready. One of the earliest authors, known by name, is Enheduanna, a Mesopotamian high priestess from more than 4,000 years ago. Her attributed hymns show how writing had moved beyond accounting into literature, devotion, and personal voice. But not everyone thought this was progress. In Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates tells a story about the invention of writing. The Egyptian god Thoth presented writing as a gift that will improve memory and wisdom. But King Thamus warns that writing may do the opposite. It may produce forgetfulness, because people will trust external marks instead of their own minds. This is one of the oldest technology criticisms in history. Socrates is basically saying, if you write everything down, you'll stop remembering. You will look wise without actually becoming wise. You will confuse access to information with understanding, which sounds strangely familiar these days. And yet, there is a beautiful irony. We only know Socrates made this argument because Plato wrote it down. The man who distrusted writing survived because of writing. And this is where the greats become interesting. The greatest people in history did not use writing only to store information. They used it to shape themselves. Marcus Aurelius never set out to write the best-selling philosophy book. His meditations were private notes to himself, probably never intended for publication. He was a Roman emperor, surrounded by war, politics, betrayal, disease, and pressure. And instead of merely thinking through his principles, he wrote them down, again and again, as a form of self-command. He was not writing to impress the world. He was writing to remind himself who he was supposed to be. That is one of the deepest uses of writing. Not memory as storage, memory as moral training. Benjamin Franklin did something similar. In his autobiography, Franklin describes his bold and arduous project of moral perfection. He made a little book, gave each virtue its own page, ruled columns for the days of the week, and marked his failures. Think about what that means. Franklin did not just want to be better. He turned character into a tracking system. Temperance, silence, order, resolution, industry, humility. Every day, the page showed him the gap between who he wanted to be and who he actually was. Most people have vague intentions. Franklin made his intentions visible. Writing gave him a mirror. Leonardo da Vinci did it another way. His notebooks were filled with sketches, observations, machines, anatomy, water, flight, geometry, and questions. Leonardo was not just recording finished ideas, he was thinking on the page. The hand moved, the eye noticed, the drawing changed the thought. And centuries later, we can still see the motion of his mind. Charles Darwin did the same thing. In 1837, in one of his private notebooks, Darwin wrote the words, "I think," above a small branching sketch, an early version of what would become the tree of life. One of the most important ideas in biology did not first appear as a polished theory. It appeared as a scribble. That is what writing does. It catches thoughts before they are ready. Francis Bacon put it simply, "Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man." Writing makes thought exact because it forces the mind to stop hiding in fog. You may think you understand something, then you try to write it down. Suddenly, the gaps appear, the weak parts appear, the lazy assumptions appear. The sentence refuses to finish because the thought was never finished. And that is why writing is not just communication. Writing is thinking under pressure. Modern cognitive science has a name for part of this: cognitive offloading. It means reducing the mental demand of a task by using the outside world, like writing something down, making a list, drawing a diagram, or saving information in a device. Research describes cognitive offloading as a way to reduce the processing burden on memory, especially when a task requires holding multiple pieces of information at once. Which means Plato was partially right. Writing does let us move memory outside ourselves. But that is not always a weakness, because once memory moves outside the brain can do something else. It can compare, combine, revise, argue, build. A shopping list may help you remember groceries, but a notebook can help Darwin see evolution, or Aurelius govern himself. A virtue chart can help Franklin measure his character. A dialogue can let Plato preserve Socrates for 2,000 years. Writing does not merely help humans remember, it helps humans become cumulative. A spoken idea has to be carried by a living person. A written idea can wait. It can sit silently on a shelf for centuries until someone is ready for it. This is the real miracle. Writing lets one mind survive long enough to meet another mind, across distance, across language, across empires, across death. Without writing, Marcus Aurelius is mostly gone. Without writing, Franklin's method disappears with him. Without writing, Darwin's private hesitation, I think, never becomes part of the story of science. Without writing, Socrates is a rumor. But with writing, the greats become available. Not as statues, not as myths, but as minds we can still learn from. So why did humans start writing things down? At first, because grain was too easy to forget. Because beer rations had to be counted. Because debts had to survive denial. Because cities needed a memory bigger than any one person. But then writing became something far greater. It became a second mind, a time machine, a mirror, a teacher, a courtroom, a confession booth, a laboratory, a bridge between the living and the dead. Humans started writing things down because memory was too small for civilization. But we kept writing because life was too short to learn only from ourselves. The first tablet may have counted barley, but every book, journal, letter, note, and unfinished sketch since then has been part of the same ancient project. Take what is inside one human mind, place it outside the body, and give it a chance to outlive us. That is why humans write things down. Not just so we can remember, so someone else can begin where we ended.